Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. Encounters with the Unknown, Volume 7, Story 1. So, I was on my way home from work about an hour ago. Stopped at a red light. The road I was traveling on towards the stoplight curves left, right before the light, and there's a building to the left, so you can't see the opposite lane of traffic until you are right at the stoplight. In addition, there's a hill right after the stoplight. As I stopped at the red light, I saw a pair of headlights traveling towards me and the car next to me on our side of the road. It's a Ford truck, not sure which model, but it's right in the middle of the road and it's coming straight at us. I'm in a tiny little Saturn. The light turns green. At that moment, neither I or the car next to me moved. I had two choices. I sit there and hope the truck swerves into the correct way at the road when he reaches the intersection, or I can take a right in hopes the driver doesn't decide to take that same turn. It was literally a 1-second decision before the truck was right on top of us. I first made the decision to start taking the right turn, but right before I let off the brake pedal, the truck swerved towards the turn I was about to take. Then it swerved back the opposite direction, slammed its brakes on about 10 feet in front of me and the car next to me, and drove on to the correct lane on the road. If I would have taken that turn, there's a good chance I would have been clipped on my left side. If I had arrived at the stoplight and it was just green a few seconds before it turned red, I would have collided head-on with the truck, as I would have no knowledge of the truck while going up the hill I mentioned in the beginning. The speed limit on this road is 45 miles per hour. I don't know exactly how I felt before this. I felt a bit weird, like the feeling that one feels like something has changed or something feels a bit off, but you don't know what. Not sure if that's the best explanation of this feeling. While I was at the gas station before, their cash register system was running slow and took a few seconds longer than usual for it to process my debit card transaction. I do believe we have a sixth sense in regards to sensing danger. This sense is most commonly talked about while you're out hunting, camping, etc., deep in the woods, and you get that feeling that something out there has bad intentions for you. If you've ever had this feeling, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. It wasn't as strong as this in this situation, but it was still there. I do also believe in luck. Whether it be coincidence or something else, someone out there was watching out for me. Story number 2. I was once backing out of my parking space at home. On my way to work, I was planning on stopping at the store just up the street. I backed out a tad so I could see. Looked left, then right, then left again, then started backing out. Then suddenly, I looked into my side view mirror and then in my rear view to see a man on a motorcycle looking in at me as he hit my rear quarter panel on the passenger side, then slid to the ground. He literally came out of nowhere, as both directions I looked at were clear. I could see a long way. It was just dark and his light was on, so he had to have been flying. Long story short, he was unharmed. Accident was my fault to start, but it was proven he was speeding. Changed to his fault. Made me late, calling the cops, ambulance, etc. How did this change my life? At the same time, I should have been at the store. An armed robbery took place where the cashier was shot and killed and 2 customers were shot. I would have been there when it happened. As it was, I drove by after the accident, saw all the police, ambulance, etc., and said nope, had enough of that, and drove on. Found out the next day what happened. Oddly though, the whole time I was dealing with my accident, I kept saying how odd it was, how many times I looked, how he came out of nowhere. The whole thing upset me so badly, I vomited. I was severely stressed, as I have 3 brothers, all injured by drivers while on motorcycles, so I have always been keenly aware of them, always on the lookout for them. I was simply glad he was uninjured, and so was I. This is just one story of many. My husband as well has had several close calls. He was at a red light, a semi to his left. He could not see past it. The light turned green, and the semi didn't move. Instinctively, my husband didn't either. Just a couple of seconds passed, and another semi blew through the intersection, he said, going at least 55 miles an hour. He would have been a smear on the road, driving a Hyundai station wagon at the time. Sixth sense indeed. Next story. It was April of 1985. I was in the Navy. My squadron sent a detachment to Philadelphia to ride the USS Forrestal out for sea trials. The ship had been in the Service Life Extension program for a couple of years. 3 of us were assigned to the night shift. This pretty much meant that we would check on the helicopters periodically and make sure that the daily and turnaround inspections were done for when day shift came on. Since the ship was doing darkened ship trials, we were not required to keep a steady watch, just go up every so often and make sure the helos were secure. Some of the ship's junior officers hassled us about not keeping a watch on the flight deck until our commander told them to buzz off. One night, I'm looking at the Platt television feed and see somebody near our helos. I run up on the flight deck and there's nobody there. I didn't think anything of it and went back below. A few hours later, I see the same person walking around our aircraft. Again, I run up on deck and there's no one there. This was strange. We were on the angle deck. It was at least 200 feet to any exit from the deck. I was up there in a few seconds, since I had about 10 feet to get outside and then 10 steps up to the deck. I don't care if you were an Olympic sprinter. There was no way to go that I couldn't see you. This happened a few more times. We got back. I didn't think about it for a few years. One evening, Unsolved Mysteries was on and they were talking about the Forrestal ghost. One of the people who saw it described exactly what I saw. In July 1967, the Forrestal had a severe fire. 134 people were killed. After that, rumors were that the ship was haunted, and that's when I knew exactly what it was that I saw that night. Next story. This was when I was 13 years old, spending the Christmas holidays abroad in a rural part of France. I was staying with relatives of mine in their house, which was a very old farmhouse. One particular day, my cousins and I decided to stay inside for the day because it was snowing heavily. We spent most of the day just wasting time and horsing around. A little later in the afternoon, my older cousin and I went up into the attic together because she was looking for something, and I followed her because I was curious to see the attic. There was a lot of stuff up there that interested me, like old books and some antique items. Once she found what she needed, I asked her if it was okay if I stayed up there for a while to look around. She giggled and said something to the effect of, "Why? It's just a bunch of old shit up here. But yeah, if you want to." I spent about half an hour walking around looking at stuff until I happened upon some old book from the early 1800s that seemed intriguing. I sat down and read it for a little while before deciding I wanted to take it back to my bedroom to read every night before bed. When I closed the book and went to stand up, my gaze immediately shifted over to a woman who was sitting in a chair on the left side of the room. This briefly startled me at first and made me gasp because I had never seen her before, and I didn't hear her come into the attic. She was wearing very old clothing, had long blonde hair, and she was quite pretty. She looked like she was somewhere between 25 and 30 years old. She didn't look solid though, and it's hard to explain exactly what I mean by that. She wasn't like the stereotypical Hollywood translucent ghost, but she had a certain opaqueness about her that tells you on an instinctual level that you're not looking at a living biological entity. She smiled and said to me, "Désolé si je vous ai fait peur, ma chère. Sorry if I scared you, dear." At this point, I didn't feel any fear or apprehension at all. This apparition radiated a kind, warm, and positive energy that I could somehow feel right down to my core, and I felt safe in her presence. It was a very brief encounter. Around 5 seconds after she spoke, she stood up, walked about 7 feet to the right of the room, and faded away mid-stride. I just silently sat there dumbfounded for a few minutes. When I left the attic, I was hesitant to tell anybody about what I saw, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. A few days later, I decided to privately ask my youngest cousin about it. She was 8 years old, and I figured the younger kids are usually a little more open to things like this and less judgmental than teenagers and adults. To my surprise, she was quite candid about it. When I asked her if she had ever seen a lady who appears out of nowhere, she responded, "Do you mean the blonde lady?" When I nodded, she then said something to the effect of, "Yeah, I see her sometimes. It's okay, she's nice." She told me that she had been seeing her since she was about 5 years old. We didn't really talk much about it, and I didn't tell anybody else what I had seen. It's something that will always vividly stick in my memory because it was so surreal, and I can still visualize her face when I close my eyes. Next story. Some years back, don't remember the exact date. Me and my wife, we went to sleep. I hadn't eaten anything heavy and I wasn't on medication of any kind. I went to sleep and during the night I see this dream. Was it a dream? Not sure. Anyway, I see this black shadowy figure with green eyes in my room, standing up. And I see him and I remember his mouth was weird. It had sharp-like teeth. The green eyes were glowing like a reptile, vertical pupil. And I felt he was mocking me or was amused at me for some reason in a condescending way. Maybe being kind of no-nonsense guy, I got furious because I really felt he was mocking me. No words were exchanged, only feelings. And I tried to attack him and actually hit him hard. That's where the dream or vision or whatever ends. In the morning, my wife is distressed and says she saw a nightmare, and I asked her what it was. And she explains to me that she saw a black shadowy figure, the exact same I saw. I asked her, did he have glowing green eyes? She kind of froze and never ever talked about it again. Me being me and knowing I'm kind of forgetful, I got a notepad I keep for notes and wrote everything down. Fast forward a few months, I see the notepad and remembered the incident. I asked her about it and pressed her and she said, only you saw it. It didn't happen. You imagined it, blah, blah. Then I showed her my notepad and then she said again, yeah, you probably influenced me and I saw the nightmare because you're always researching those UFO things. So that's my story. Kind of hard to believe, I know. My only question is if it was a dream, how can two people see the same dream? If it was a paranormal entity, why did it feel nice mocking me and seeing me as an inferior being? Also, funny how memory works. My wife, after all this time, thought I was the only one that saw that thing in the dream. Next story. My stay at Kemper Military School is short. February through commencement in 2001, maybe 2002. At that time, the barracks above the mess hall was closed off, a giant wall constructed in front of the staircase. I remembered stories of Sergeant Sloan's office, which opens to a balcony of sorts right above the mess hall, visible from the main yard, where we met every morning and kids in trouble had to walk the square for hours. Anyway, myself and 3 others, 2 were twins from Jersey if I recalled, scaled some walls, grabbed some fire escape ladders, and climbed our way into those upper floors of that mess hall building. I believe it was E-Barracks, but I can't remember exactly. Anyway, we checked out the abandoned barracks. Mostly rooms with messes strewn about, beds torn open, stuff everywhere. What would you expect? We had heard the stories of the old boy ghosts that would come and inspect your uniform if you stood at attention, and how, if you slid an old boy pin across the floor, the doors would slam shut or whatever. Cool stories, but we were too scared to try it. Also, none of us were old boys, I think. So we stumbled on a door with a padlock, and the sign of the door says, Sergeant Sloan. No surprise because we had heard about it before. A few rooms down, we find a shoebox with about 100 keys in it. Someone, I think it was me, but you know how memories go, thought maybe we could find the serial number on the lock to Sergeant Sloan's office and match it to a key in the box and get entrance. That's what we did, and it worked. So, here's where it gets weird. In Sloan's office, there was a window, a desk, and a cage. It looked as if nothing had been touched since the 80s. The cage, though, sat about waist height with a weird pulley mechanism with a light bulb that would shine into a poem about entering the underworld. In the cage, about 60% of a human skeleton, about 3 feet tall, suspended by what looked like fishing wire to make up the shape of the skeleton, but with many pieces obviously missing. I can't remember what the poem or writing was about, or how the pulley system and light bulb worked, but it was super bizarre and definitely dark. The only thing I could come up with was maybe there was truth to the little boy Kemper stories and Sloan was a big fan. to say the least. Anyway, we locked up the room to make it look like we had never been there and went about our day. If I recall, one of us kept the padlock key, but I don't know what happened to it. I know I had it hidden in my room for a while. So, anyway, I told friends the story for years, and I think they believed I was lying. But I'm not. I could name the names of my accomplices, but no thank you. Basically, I just wanted to know what Sloan was up to up there and why he had a child skeleton in a cage with occultic writing on it. Next story. This happened while I was driving for Lyft, the ride-sharing service in Owings Mills, Maryland. I was going to pick up a ride. I noticed a good number of deer walking among the parked cars at an apartment complex. One female deer appeared suffering from mange, having lost all its fur with its skin near almost leather-like. It appeared it was walking, but it was also looked like it was sick. The other deers appeared normal. Though I noticed it, I really didn't pay any attention. I did notice numerous deer sightings the rest of the day. Much later that night, I picked up a Hispanic family near the Essex area of Maryland. A father, a mother, and 2 small children and 1 baby. The destination was in a very rural area. While on the road in that area, it's mostly wooden with no other vehicles. One of the small children spoke and pointed and made the comment, "What is that?" His father, who was sitting in the front seat next to me, said, "Oh my God, it's a skinwalker. Do not look at it." I glazed over and the father said, "Do not look at it." This deer appeared exceptionally light, almost vanilla color, maybe more visible in the dark. I could see it took several steps in a running stride on all 4 legs, then take several steps on its hind legs. Its running was not a smooth motion. The father kept saying for me not to look at it. I kept my eyes on the road as I was driving, but I wanted to look badly. The father turned towards me, telling me not to look, but he was also reaching back between the seats, grabbing his boys and trying to force them not to look at it. At least one of the boys struggled to look. Then we approached a lone red light at a 4-way intersection with no other vehicles visible. The adults were screaming, "Do not stop, drive through the light." My Waze app said it was a red light camera. I could see the long light white camera mount. The adults and children were now screaming for me to run the light. While I stopped, the creature went from all 4s to standing on 2 legs. It was near the window. The father was yelling and put his hands towards my face, blocking my view. I could only see it twisting its head. I finally decided to run the red light, but it turned green as I did so. The family then spent the rest of the ride speaking in Spanish nonstop. I dropped them off, and they told me not to take the same road back. I asked them if they would be all right. They implied their grandmother, who was the designated spot, would know what to do for them. I selected my home address on Waze, but the only way back was to go down the same road. So I did. Eventually, I saw the creature again running in the woods. It was now running faster than I was driving. It ran some distance in front of me. I could see it again go from all 4s to standing on 2 legs. It then squatted like an Asian along the side of the road. It was on my left side, and I was on the right side of the road. I did not mean to slow down, but obviously I did. Now, it became a man with a hoodie on. His clothes were all light tan. So, I drove by this man now squatting alongside a rural road. Though he would not look directly at me as I passed by him, his look was that of 100% predator. I do not know what I saw. Next story. A friend told me about some events that happened many years ago. He was 17 or 18 years old, living at his parents' house. Some relatives decided to come and spend some time for about a month, and he volunteered the use of his room. During that time, he slept on an air mattress in the basement. I'll add here that I've been to their house many times, and there was nothing at all scary about it. It's a typical middle-class home. It was built in the mid-1950s. Back to the story. He said on a couple of occasions late at night, he became aware of what seemed to be an invisible presence moving around near him as he was laying there in the dark. He listened intently and was sure he heard footsteps. He got up, turned the light on, didn't see anything, and went back to bed. He said this happened twice within about a week. He was aware of something moving past him, moving right alongside him as he was laying there. The basement was totally dark. We're talking pitch black. I'm sure that added to the fear factor. On the third time, he heard something breathing. It grew louder. He thought it had to be someone upstairs snoring or breathing so loudly that he was hearing it downstairs. He listened intently. He related this next part in great detail. Whatever it was in the corner, the northwest corner of the room, only about 10 feet away. It became very loud, like a large animal breathing slowly and steadily. He listened for about a minute, thinking that somehow it would turn out to be something obvious and benign. He said he could actually tell it was coming up high in the corner, like something standing in the corner. He got up, turned on all the lights, and went upstairs. He stayed at my house for the next couple of days. We both went back to his house and sat in the basement a couple of times. Apparently, whatever it was gone. Hopefully. Next story. Well, I'll admit, I pissed the bed a lot as a very young child because I was too terrified to go to the toilet in the middle of the night because there was just always this sense of a presence there, sometimes more than one. My parents would try and reassure me it was them coming in to check on me when I was only half asleep, and my brain misinterpreted it. But I knew I was very much awake. It would sometimes happen the moment I got into bed and the light was out. I could see the light under the bottom of the door from the living room. I know damn well I was awake. I've had trouble sleeping my entire life, and nobody opened that door and came in. I could hear the TV, my parents talking, and then I'd hear the patter of adult footsteps on the carpet, and always from the doorway to my bed, like someone had entered the room and was walking towards me. If my head was not beneath the blanket, I would terrifyingly feel someone's breath on my neck or face when the footsteps stopped next to my bed, like someone was leaning over me with their face a few inches away from mine. Never experienced anything like it anywhere else but in that house, although I have experienced that overwhelming sense of something standing behind me in a home I rented years later, but there was nothing physical like sound or feeling like what I experienced as a kid. It annoyed me. It played as a child fantasy when I knew very damn well it was happening. It didn't help the fact that my mother, father, brother, and sister all had their own ghost experiences, and none were that positive. It was as if everyone knew it was true, that there was something weird about the house, but they were all in some kind of denial. Yeah, parents, if your young kids tell you they're experiencing terrifying stuff at night, maybe don't tell them your own ghost stories. My parents were pretty young themselves, early 20s both when I was born, and I was the youngest. Like, apparently my maternal grandmother was very ill for a long time and died very young. Not long after, my parents moved us in there. I was like over a year old. One day, in the first week in there, apparently the entire house filled up with the smell of my grandmother's medicine cabinet. She was on a ton of meds that apparently had a strong odor. They had at this point been long removed from the premises. Both parents gave identical accounts of this, like it was as if someone turned on a fog machine that filled the place with odor instead of vapor. It apparently freaked my mother out big time, and she refused to stay there and took my siblings and I to stay at an aunt's place. My old man, being the big tough ex-army boxing champ, laughed it off and stayed, because my old man was always needed to show the world he's no coward. He apparently joined us a few hours later after an old glass dome clock with a rotating pendulum that my mother has since she was a young girl but never had the key to wind it up, start up on its own. Pendulum spun and away she ticked. Smell got stronger, and then my dad got that presence feeling until his big badass hightailed it and joined us. I think everyone in the family experienced that clock doing a spin on its own at some point. My mom wouldn't find a key that fitted for another 20 years. It was hell from the age of 2 to 8 when I was in the front room of the house I shared with my brother before the house was rebuilt. I swear, I used to see dark silhouettes of people like dressed in the 1700s, early 1800s, almost every night. I could easily make out the shapes of what I now know would be horsehair wigs, lapels on shoulders, what you'd imagine a ship crew or government officials might wear around the time period. But they were pitch black, but very sharply defined. And no, it wasn't shadows from the tree branches, because I could clearly see those, and they weren't as dark, and well, they looked like branches, not real animated people. Another thing that stands out was the phantom calling. Quite often, I would hear someone say my name. My brother and sister also experienced that. Can't recall if the parents did. Best I recall is my mom telling us to never answer it. Again, another thing that I've only ever experienced in that place, nowhere else. It was just your first name, nothing else. Crisp, clear, and concise. And always when you were home alone. There were tons of stories from that house. Eventually, the parents tore it down and rebuilt it. First tore down and rebuilt the front, then tore down the back half and rebuilt that a couple of years later. And yeah, that feeling and the weird experiences kept on going. The entire house was new, but the parents used the bricks from the old living room chimney for a wall between the new kitchen and the living room. My brother and I would joke the house ghost clung to that and stayed in the new house. House had a Jekyll and Hyde feel to it. Felt super homey and comfortable during the day, but night, and especially when the lights were off, it felt unwelcoming. If our parents were out and the power went out, my brother, sister, and I would rather sit outside in the dark and wait for the power to come back on, or the parents to come home if it was a fuse, than even sit inside with a candle or a flashlight. That old haunted house feeling was weird to have in a house which was now modern and brand new. Funny thing is, I still miss that place as much as it probably traumatized me as a kid. Always wanted to go back and ask the current tenants if they've experienced anything like we did in it. I've experienced weird stuff since. Much I can rationalize away. Some I can't explain. I'm a pretty scientific and skeptical, logical guy, but I've never experienced anything even close to what I saw, heard, and felt in that house growing up. Next story. I used to be stationed at F.E. Warren Air Force Base, Cheyenne, Wyoming. To give you a brief backstory, the base was built in 1867. It used to be a cavalry fort. I have two true stories which happened to me personally, but I'll just tell you one today. One night, while returning with my wife to our house on the base from visiting friends, we walked in the house. My wife sat on the sofa in the living room, and I went to turn the heater up. After adjusting the thermostat, I looked around and started walking towards where my wife sat, and a dress came at me and threw me. I tried to hit it with a jacket I was holding, but it went right through it. As soon as it passed through me, I looked back and it was gone. I hadn't had any alcohol to drink it, and I wasn't sleepy, so I was in my right mind when I say this. This happened in 1983, so it was a long time ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. The dress was one of those bell-shaped dresses that women wore in the 1800s. It was sort of a tan or beige color. I could see layers of lace going around the dress. It had short sleeves that were puffy at the end. As soon as this happened, I started to shake, and I couldn't stop the tears. I just stared at my wife and cried like a baby. She asked me what was wrong, but I couldn't talk. No words would come out. She started laughing because she thought I was messing with her. When I was finally able to utter some tremulous words, I told her what happened and asked if she'd seen anything. She laughed again and said, "I didn't see anything," and one of the living room lamps shut off and then back on. I had one of those little knobs that you have to turn in order to turn the light off and on, so you hear the clicking sound at the end. She started screaming and crying after she saw and heard the light, and I asked her again, "Did you see anything?" And she said no, and the light did it again. That night, we left our house and went to a friend's house off base. After telling my friend and his wife the story, he suggested that I call the base chaplain to see if he could bless the house or something. I called the chaplain, and he said that he would see me at my house the following day. When he got to my house the next day, he asked me to relate to him again what had happened to me. Unbeknownst to me, the chaplain had spoken with the base Catholic priest and told him to go to my house. When the priest showed up, he sprinkled holy water in every room. I'm not Catholic, but I was so freaked out that I didn't care if they flew in a witch doctor from Haiti to take care of this thing. After the priest left, he tried to start his brand new Cadillac, which he had just bought. The car wouldn't start, so a few other people in the neighborhood tried to help him, but the car still didn't start or even make a sound. They ended up pushing the car to a neighbor's house a couple of houses down because the neighbor had a battery charger and thought he could get the car started. Before they put the charger on the battery, the priest tried starting the car again, and it started. I didn't know anything about all this with a car until the next day when I went to my command building and was told the story. They offered me another house on base if I wanted to move, but I turned it down because to move out of a base house, you had to perform a thorough cleaning. After the cleaning, the house gets inspected, and it's extremely difficult to pass that inspection. You usually have to hire a company that does it professionally. I would also have to move off base, so I have to wait until another house was available, which normally took months. The reason the military was so cooperative was that what happened to me was a common occurrence on that base. I didn't know any of this at the time, but while at my office, I heard different stories after story about the same thing happening on the base to other people.